The U.S. Department of Justice works under the president, but not for the president. It works for the American people to uphold the law. Today, the January 6th committee laid out how former President Trump tried to subvert that relationship, pressuring the department to discredit the 2020 election. Here's how committee chairman Benny Thompson put it.
Donald Trump didn't just want the Justice Department to investigate. He wanted the Justice Department to help legitimize his lies.
Today's witnesses worked in the department under the Trump administration. Former acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen, who the president tried to replace, that's the gentleman in the middle. Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue, he's the one on the right. And Stephen Engel on the left. He led the department's Office of Legal Counsel. Leading much of the questioning was Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. He asked Richard Donahue about the former president apparently ignoring that the election was valid.
The president said, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. So, Mr. Donahue, that's a direct quote from President Trump, correct?
That's an exact quote from the president, yes.
One key plot point came when the president considered making Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark the acting attorney general. Soon after the election, Mr. Clark started promoting bogus allegations of voter fraud. Before today's hearing, federal authorities searched his home. It's unclear exactly what they were looking for. Now, Jeffrey Rosen, the guy who was sitting in the middle, he was Jeffrey Clark's boss at that time. He testified that he and many of his colleagues warned very strongly against the replacement.
The issue really wasn't about me. It would have been fine, as I said, to have had Rich Donahue replace me. I would have said, great, I get 17 days vacation or something. But the issue was the use of the Justice Department. And it's just so important that the Justice Department adhere to the facts and the law. And so if the Justice Department gets out of the role that it's supposed to play, that's really bad for our country. And I don't know of a simpler way to say that. And when you damage our fundamental institutions, it's not easy to repair them.
Let's break down today's hearing, starting with Renato Mariotti, a former federal prosecutor. Mr. Mariotti, good to have you with us. I know we'll have a few other guests shortly, but I wonder what your top lines were from the hearing. This almost felt like a recruitment video for federal prosecutors. Like if you wanted to paint a picture of being the last line of defense for the U.S. Constitution, of what that looks like in a real working sense, today was it.
Yeah, well, it was definitely scary. I think a cautionary tale. Really, we shouldn't have our democracy come down to whether or not a few top lawyers at the Justice Department are willing to resign or not. Because let's face it, if Mr. Clark was more savvy, more experienced, was a more compelling candidate for Attorney General, he might have been able to pull this off. So I think it's actually very concerning. I mean, what my takeaway is that the weak link in Team Trump are these crooked lawyers. And when I say crooked lawyers, I'm referring to Mr. Clark, Mr. Giuliani, Mr. Weissman, and so forth. We've kind of, that's been a recurring theme here. And Clark is an example of somebody who really, despite being some, fancy lawyer, really left himself hanging out there. He was trying to send a letter out that contained falsehoods. He was conducting his own shadow investigations. And that's why he's in his pajamas watching the FBI go through his house as opposed to leading a coup or whatever he imagined himself doing.
Today felt like it was a lot of receipts. There was a whole lot of information, a lot of documents, a lot of process. Maybe not the most compelling testimony, just in kind of a, person sitting on the couch at home sense. But we learned a lot today, I think. What stood out to you in terms of what we learned from today's hearing that maybe we didn't know before?
Well, we learned about members of Congress seeking pardons. That was really interesting. I think that's something I'll remember because, of course, members of Congress have broad constitutional protection from prosecution under something called the Speech and Debate Clause. So the fact that a member of Congress thinks they need a pardon really means that they're doing some extra congressional activities that they think that they're in trouble for. I also have to say that the handwritten notes that Mr. Donahue took, talking about how, you should just say that there's fraud and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman, is really damning. And frankly, it once again just shows, the lengths that Clark took, maybe it strikes me just because I am a lawyer and a former Justice Department lawyer, having somebody willing to put themselves out there that way. It's amazing to me how people like him and John Eastman and others were willing to take such extraordinary risks and risk criminal prosecution in order to help a man who was trying to overthrow our system of government. It's shocking, and I have to say it bothers me that there isn't a bipartisan consensus that we have to do more to make sure this doesn't happen again.
With regard to the partisan aspect of that, let's bring in another voice for the conversation, Jonathan Weissman, the president of Public Citizen, which is a progressive think tank. Mr. Weissman, I wonder what your sense is today of the political impact of this, considering that there were a number of Republican members of Congress who were called out today, and the questioning was led by one of the only two Republicans who were on this committee, Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, who really stands apart from his party right now in terms of his view on the former president's actions.
Yeah, we're going to have to wait and see. I think what he did and what Liz Cheney did in her closing remarks was really appeal to Republicans and say, look, this is hard to accept, but if you've been watching these hearings, you've seen the evidence unfold in front of you, and it is what it is. And this is not the kind of behavior that you should support. As much as you may have loved and appreciated President Trump, what he did was wrong. And I think what we have to hope for is that message is breaking through to those people, as well as to people who, aren't hardcore in terms of living and breathing Donald Trump, but either are otherwise not paying a lot of attention to politics, may have forgotten what's going on, or feel themselves a little bit adrift. I think this is so compelling, so extraordinary, and so clear that hopefully it's going to break through for them.
So, Mr. Weissman, where does this go from here? We were talking earlier today before the show in terms of, okay, well, all the things we've laid out, we've talked to election workers, we've talked to election officials from Georgia, we now have DOJ people. What is the next episode in this drama? We know the committee has paused its hearings for a while because it's going to need some time to get the latest information it has together. But, Mr. Weissman, what do you think is the next logical episode of these hearings?
Well, I think they gave us a clue. The next thing is now to bring it back to the violence, that they've shown the pressure that Trump put on state officials, onto the vice president, onto the Department of Justice. And now how the president, the violence didn't just happen. Violence was a tool. It was part of the overall program to pursue a coup against the people of the United States. And so I think that's where the hearings are going to go. In terms of where this goes for the world, I think as this moves forward, we're going to look to the Justice Department and see what kind of prosecutions are they willing to bring? What are the tools that they can bring against individuals involved to ensure some kind of accountability? But there's also going to be a lot of focus, I think, on members of Congress and in states where not only is the big lie being spread, but people are actively trying to continue the policies and practices that were associated with the coup, whether it's suppressing the votes of people of color or putting in place mechanisms to overturn legitimately decided elections. And that's going to be really, I think, flashpoint issues around the country as we emerge from these hearings.
Renato Mariotti and Robert Weissman, we appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thank you both very much. Now, today's hearing was the last one in this month. The committee decided to push the final scheduled hearings into next month. Apparently, it needs more time to process new information. So what have we learned so far, especially as it relates to the threats against American democracy? Let's bring in Margaret Huang, the president and CEO of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Ms. Huang, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Joshua, it's great to be here.
What stood out to you in some of the latest hearings, particularly as it relates to the work that the SPLC has been doing to monitor some of the groups who were there on January 6th?
Well, the Southern Poverty Law Center has been monitoring hate and extremist groups for 4 decades now. And so we've obviously been paying a lot of close attention to the role of hate and extremist groups in the activities of January 6th. I think today's hearing, though, was really compelling because it focused on the role that President Trump played himself, along with his closest advisors and with his allies in Congress, to actually encourage and lead the violent attack that happened on January 6th. And we really got a better picture of that today by understanding what happened at the Department of Justice.
What's been going on lately with some of these groups? Pardon me. What's been going on lately with some of these groups since the hearings began? I've been wondering whether or not the presence of all of this evidence being put out in the public eye for the whole world to see has kind of chastened these groups into silence, whether they have gone to ground, whether they have been as vocal as usual with their core constituencies and memberships. What impact are these hearings having on these groups specifically?
There were 2 groups in particular that we've tracked for years. The Proud Boys, which is one of the most violent extremist groups that we've monitored, particularly at the time of the insurrection, as well as the anti-government conspiracy group, the Oath Keepers. It's worth noting that both of those groups, the leadership of those groups, have now been charged officially with acts of sedition. So that has obviously affected those groups' activities and the leadership of those groups. However, what we're also seeing is an emboldenment of other anti-government and hate groups across the country. Particularly, this is clear with the uptick and the increase of disinformation and misinformation about January 6th, about the 2020 election that continues. The Southern Poverty Law Center just did a poll at the end of April that looked at the potential risks of political violence. And what we found was actually quite alarming. We learned that 3/4 of the people who believe that the 2020 election was illegitimate also believe in the conspiracy theory of the Great Replacement theory. This theory actually purports that liberals have a systematic attempt to try to replace conservative white voters with voters of color. And to have 3/4 of Republicans in this country embracing that theory is quite alarming.
I wonder where this goes from here for your organization. I think we've talked a lot since the hearings about potential criminal charges and where that might go. And that's tricky, right? Because, political speech is broadly protected in this country. Even hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. Violence is not, but speech is. And I think part of the challenge for the law is figuring out the point at which, well, maybe the president said something goofy and then somebody decided to act on it violently. How much liability do you assign and how do you know? That's the legal debate. In terms of the cultural debate, what now? Where do we go from here?
Well, the first and most important thing is that we have to keep supporting and elevating the work of this vital committee. There is no question that one of the best solutions to misinformation that's being put out across social media channels and online is to actually share the truth and to have different voices, people who are respected, people from the former administration and others actually sharing what happened and being on the record about what happened. It's also going to be really important, Joshua, that we focus on the upcoming elections. How do we protect people's right to vote and to participate in those elections? How do we protect election workers and elections officials from some of the increasing threats and risks that they're facing because of the misinformation that's been put out about January 6th? I would say on a last note, what we have to do is to step up our efforts to counter domestic terrorism. There is no question that we have to root out the racism and the bigotry that is at the heart of the actions that took place on January 6th.
And with regard to those hearings, anyone who has missed any of those hearings, obviously we've been covering them. If you just go to our YouTube channel, the NBC News YouTube channel, you can watch all of the hearings in their entirety as well as extended excerpts of some of the key moments of testimony from the last few days. Margaret Huang of the Southern Poverty Law Center, Appreciate you making time tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joshua. Great to be here.
Still to come, the right to bear arms in public. The Supreme Court just cleared the way for more people to carry guns outside the home. We'll consider what that means for gun owners and for public safety. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Americans have the right to have firearms at home for protection. At home. But what about carrying a gun in public? Does the Constitution protect that? Today, the U.S. Supreme Court finally answered that question. Yes. Justices struck down a New York state law that required gun owners to justify their need for a concealed carry permit. NBC Justice correspondent Pete Williams has more on the ruling. Hey, Pete.
This is a landmark ruling on gun rights because for the first time in American history, the Supreme Court has ruled on what the Second Amendment means when it says there's a right to keep and bear arms. The court said that means a right to carry a handgun outside the home for self-defense. The justices struck down a New York law that required showing a special need beyond a general desire for self-defense to get a permit for carrying a concealed gun in public. By a vote of 6-3, the court said no other constitutional right requires showing some special need to exercise it, and they say that's not how the Second Amendment works. The National Rifle Association, which helped bring this case to the court, is praising the ruling, saying it will bring, quote, life-saving justice to law-abiding Americans who have lived under unconstitutional restrictions all across the country. The majority opinion was written by Justice Clarence Thomas. He's been the court's most consistent advocate of gun rights. He says local governments can still ban guns from sensitive places. He says that includes schools, government buildings, state capitals, polling places, and courthouses. But he said it doesn't simply mean any place where there are large crowds, so that leaves unanswered where guns can be banned, such as in nightclubs, movie theaters, sports arenas, subways, and so on. And Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh say states can still impose licensing requirements to get a concealed carry permit, like background and mental health checks and firearms training. The decision will have an immediate impact on New York and 5 other states with similar restrictions: California, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, plus here in Washington, D.C. New York's Governor Kathy Hochul calls the decision reckless.
Does everyone understand what a concealed weapon means? That you have no forewarning, that someone can hide a weapon on them and go into our subways, go into our grocery stores, like stores up in Buffalo, New York, where I'm from, go into a school in Parkland or Uvalde. This could place millions of New Yorkers in harm's way. And this is at a time when we're still mourning the loss of lives, as I just mentioned.
Today's ruling also contains language that goes far beyond the issue of concealed carry in New York. It says a concern for public safety isn't enough to justify new gun controls. Justice Thomas says gun regulations must be, quote, consistent with this nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation, and that sets a very high bar for future gun restrictions. In dissent, the court's 3 liberals list 9 recent mass shootings, including at the school in Uvalde, Texas, and the supermarket in Buffalo, New York. Justice Stephen Breyer says courts must consider the serious dangers and consequences of gun violence that lead states to regulate firearms. So 9 Supreme Court decisions now have yet to be decided from this term, and that includes the challenge to Roe v. Wade. We'll get some more decisions tomorrow and then again next week. Joshua?
Thank you, Pete. That's NBC Justice correspondent Pete Williams with more on the Supreme Court ruling. Meanwhile, a gun violence prevention bill is advancing in the Senate. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act may be the most significant measure of its kind in decades. Among other things, it would enhance background checks for younger gun buyers, fund school safety and mental health programs, and address gun violence in intimate relationships. Today, the bill cleared a key procedural hurdle. 15 Republicans and all 50 Democrats voted to bypass a GOP filibuster. That would be more than enough support to actually pass the bill and send it to the House for passage. Let's continue now with Jonathan Lowy. He's the Chief Counsel and Vice President of Legal at Brady, an organization that advocates against gun violence. Mr. Lowy, welcome to the program.
My pleasure, Joshua.
Could I start with your reactions to that Supreme Court ruling that came out today?
Disturbed and angry. I mean, this is a reckless decision. It has nothing to do with history or the text of the Constitution. And what it does is it suggests that judges cannot consider whether laws are saving people's lives and are necessary to save lives, and can just strike them down, even if they're wildly popular and necessary to protect our communities and children.
What would you say to those, including the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, you see their sign there, the ones who brought this lawsuit, who say the Second Amendment gives me a right to protect myself at home. I shouldn't lose those rights when I go out in public. I should be able to protect myself as I see fit, even in public, without the presumption that I would do something criminal or accidental with my firearm. I should be presumed to be able to practice that right wherever I am. What would you say to them?
Well, for one thing, there has been a long-standing tradition where American, states, federal government has regulated guns and other weapons to protect public safety. And that runs through the Constitution, and virtually every right has been restrained in some ways to protect public safety. So we've never had a court that has said you can't consider safety. You can't consider whether lives are at stake. And when you're dealing with lethal firearms, that's certainly the case. And it's also important to understand that we talk about this right as a right to carry guns in public. What it really is a right to carry guns in public so that when you deem it necessary, you can pull that gun out and shoot and perhaps kill a fellow American. And if you know what happened to Trayvon Martin and Ahmaud Arbery, two unarmed black men killed by people carrying guns because they thought it was necessary to shoot a person. That's what happens when you allow this sort of policy.
Let me get your reaction to something President Biden said today in response to the Supreme Court decision. Watch.
It affects only 40 states, a lot of states it affects. And the phrase that I found noticeable was there's a difference between states that say may and say shall. If you have to say you shall give, you shall do A, B, C, they're the ones that are going to have problems. But most say may. I mean, may, and I got it reversed, may and shall. And so the gun laws in 40 of these states are still in place based on the decision.
So, Mr. Loy, what the president's kind of saying is that the way that the laws are written in a variety of states, he seems to be suggesting that this ruling might have very mixed effects in some states, depending on how they're written. What do you see as the legislative path forward for your organization, for people who share your point of view, in terms of concealed carry laws?
Well, I mean, as Pete said in the lead up, there are 6 other states, if you include Washington, D.C., that are potentially directly affected by the decision, that have restrictions, discretionary restrictions on public carrying. And they will face new lawsuits. I think there are arguments to uphold those laws, but they will be most directly impacted by this decision. But then the other aspect of the decision, where the court changed the test that's applied in Second Amendment cases to basically take out public safety considerations and just rely on tradition and history, that could be used to strike down virtually any gun law that's on the books or maybe on the books. So that is, maybe the biggest deal in this case. Now, Brady will continue to fight to enact strong laws at the federal level and the state level, and will also work in the courts to defend those laws. And that's all we can do. We cannot stand for a society where we're essentially, not allowed to protect ourselves from gun violence and not allowed to have the laws that every other country in the world has that are reasonable and that keep our families safe.
Jonathan Lowy of Brady. I should note, by the way, we are keeping an eye on the Senate. It is possible that this bill could actually move tonight. They're working through some other procedural measures. They're working on a procedural motion from Republican Senator Ted Cruz that would table the bill. That's not expected to succeed. It's kind of his way of expressing his opposition to it because he has a bill of his own that is not advancing. But we will keep an eye on this bill just in case it passes within the next few minutes. Mr. Lowy, appreciate you making time tonight. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in a moment, including Ukraine deepening its Western alliances as a candidate to join the EU, and a major settlement for victims of the Surfside condo collapse. Ukraine is now officially a candidate to join the European Union. Today, the EU granted candidate status to both Ukraine and its southern neighbor, Moldova. This starts the process of joining the EU, but officially becoming a full member could take years or even decades. So why join? And how might the war with Russia affect this process? Joining us now is John Herbst, a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, and today he is the senior director of the Eurasia Center. Ambassador, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
What do you make of this advance in status for Ukraine? Was this something that seemed inevitable? Did it seem like a long shot? How do you view it?
It seemed like a long shot. And in fact, it was a surprise to just about everyone when Macron and Scholz and Draghi went to Kyiv and last week and proposed this. This gesture was unexpected. It's very positive. It means that Europe, which has always sort of kept Ukraine at a certain distance, even as they supported against Kremlin aggression, was willing to embrace it. Very important step.
So you've got Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, Olaf Scholz, the chancellor of Germany, and Mario Draghi, who is the prime minister of Italy, going to Kyiv and saying, we want you in. We want you as part of the EU. Why? What does Ukraine have to offer the European Union? And what does the European Union have to offer Ukraine?
Point of fact, Ukraine is, geographically speaking, the largest country wholly in Europe. It had a population of over 40 million before this new Russian invasion began in February. It has substantial economic resources, grain, titanium, some gas and some oil, though not that much, but some export capacity. And these are all things that would be very, very useful to Europe. And stability in Ukraine is critical for European security. So all these things are assets. But of course, the great problem is Moscow's aggression against Ukraine.
Now, put this in some context with the other alliance that has been talked about in terms of Ukraine, and that's NATO. How does this compare to the possibility of Ukraine? And there you see it on the map. You see that wall of NATO presence in Eastern Europe, wrapping kind of all the way along the western side of Russia, right up to Sweden and Finland, right up in the northwest corner of Russia, which are, kind of knocking on Russia's door. And now you could have Ukraine. What would that mean compared to what EU membership would mean for Ukraine?
Well, one thing that EU membership does not bestow is the security guarantee, Article 5 in NATO. But it is true that most nations which joined NATO also joined the EU after the Cold War ended. Germany and France have now said they are quite happy with the notion of Ukraine joining NATO, the EU, if Ukraine meets the criteria, but they are still opposed to Ukraine joining NATO. So this would be very important, joining the EU, for Ukraine's economy, also for its overall political stability, but it does not provide the great security that joining NATO provides. But it would be a step, perhaps, towards joining NATO.
This feels like exactly what Vladimir Putin did not want out of all of this. This feels like it has driven Ukraine into the arms of the West and these two alliances that Mr. Putin flat out hates. He needs that kind of leverage, right, that he has with countries like Germany in terms of oil sales and energy sales. Like that's kind of its strongest leverage, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that feels like his strongest leverage with the West. And now this war seems to have created more of what he really either didn't bank on or was hoping might not happen. But this doesn't seem good for him.
You're absolutely right. And just to underscore that, it's worth noting that this crisis, which led Moscow to attack Ukraine in 2014, began because Putin said it was unacceptable that Ukraine and the European Union are going to conclude a trade agreement. And here, as a result of this massive new invasion by Putin, the EU is embracing Ukraine. So this is one more sign of Putin's geopolitical incompetence. The other huge sign, of course, is that Sweden and Finland, which for many decades were proud neutral countries, are now asking to join NATO because they see Putin as a direct threat to their security and their stability. And of course, they're right.
Is it possible, just to take the opposite side of this, is it possible, is it a crazy idea that if Ukraine does join the European Union and Putin continues his campaign against Ukraine, say over the months and years to come, that drags Europe deeper into this morass, right? Like if Ukraine was a member of NATO right now, the U.S. would be at war with Russia. Like we would have an Article 5 responsibility to come help Ukraine if they were members of NATO right now. Aren't there entanglements if Europe decides to get more involved with Ukraine and Vladimir Putin keeps it up? I mean, doesn't that possibly have a knock-on effect for the rest of Western Europe?
You're absolutely right that if Ukraine joins NATO and Moscow is at war, if Ukraine joins the EU and Moscow is at war with the EU, that gives the EU more reason to try and help Ukraine defend itself and to end the war. But I can tell you this, if Ukraine were a member of NATO, it's highly unlikely Putin would have attacked attacked Ukraine because it would mean attacking NATO. And it's something that's very important for Americans to understand. We have a vital interest, an extremely important interest in helping Ukraine defeat Russia without American troops. Because if Putin wins in Ukraine, his next stop is going to be the Baltic states, our NATO allies, whom we have to defend with American lives. So the smart strategic play for us is making sure that Putin gets completely bogged down in Ukraine and the Ukrainians defeat him, which is why we need to send far more arms to Ukraine than we're currently doing.
I think it was the head of Lithuania who put an op-ed in the New York Times warning about what might happen with Russia depending on what happens to Ukraine, that Ukraine would not be the end of all of this. Ambassador John Herbst of the Eurasia Center, good to see you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Smokers, listen up. Effective immediately, electronic cigarettes made by Juul are banned in the U.S. The FDA made that decision today. Juul must stop selling and distributing its e-cigarettes and all 4 types of its cartridges, or pods. Products that are still on store shelves have to come down right away. The FDA says it ordered the ban because data about the product's safety were, in its words, insufficient and conflicting. Critics have accused Juul for years of marketing to young people. Back in 2020, the FDA banned its mint and fruit-flavored pods in hopes of preventing teenagers from vaping. In a 2019 survey from the American Lung Association, nearly 60% of young people said they preferred Juul to other brands. Today, a statement from the association blamed the company for the youth vaping epidemic, claiming they, quote, prey on youth. In a statement, Juul says it disagrees with the FDA's findings and is exploring its options. In South Florida, the families of victims of the Surfside condo collapse just secured a settlement of $1 billion. The judge's decision comes 1 year after this tragedy. 98 people died when the 12-story Champlain Towers South collapsed. The anniversary of this disaster is tomorrow. Family members will gather for a private vigil and to light a torch in honor of the victims. First Lady Dr. Jill Biden plans to attend. It has been 50 years since Title IX changed civil rights for women. Now the White House is planning to enhance it and make it more inclusive. We'll tell you how when we come back. Today marks the 50th anniversary of the signing of Title IX. The legislation prohibits discrimination based on sex in education programs that receive federal financial assistance. Title IX marked the beginning of a new era for women's sports spanning decades. Today, it's become a flashpoint for both sides of the debate, when it comes to the role of transgender women in sports. President Biden says he wants to expand Title IX's protections to better include LGBTQ people. But where do we stand now? NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson has the story.
9-year-old Kieran Clausen collects crystals. She dabbles in face paint, and she loves sports. What do you play?
I did play volleyball, soccer, and I want to play basketball.
To Kieran, who's transgender, it's not about racking up victories.
I don't want to win any trophies for it, though. I feel like that's the most unfair way to compete because it's not about winning.
What's it about?
Having fun with your friends.
But next week, her state, Indiana, will ban trans girls like her from playing girls' sports, joining at least 15 other states with similar laws. Now, the Clausens' only hope is that the courts will step in.
It's tough. It's hard to do everything that you can to support your child and then have lawmakers come in who don't know anything and say that you're doing the wrong thing for your child. It's really hard.
It's very personal. The lawmakers are attacking one of the smallest minorities that we have.
Title IX is so important to our family, and it's not just for sports. It's so that she is not discriminated against because of her identity.
50 years ago today, Title IX became a landmark law banning discrimination against women and girls in most schools. But the fight now centers around whether that federal right should extend to transgender students.
It's very sad that Title IX has kind of been warped to include biological males when it should be protecting biological females.
Chelsea Mitchell is one of 4 student athletes suing the Connecticut Association of Schools, now appealing the case's dismissal, arguing the state violated their Title IX protections by letting trans girls compete against them at track meets.
From the moment I stepped foot on the track in my first race, I fell in love with the sport.
What about young transgender girls who are also falling in love with track? Should they be denied the same experience that you've had?
Everyone deserves the opportunity to compete. It just needs to be done where it's most fair, and women's sports need to be kept as women's sports.
This week, swimming's global governing body effectively banned trans women from competing in women's events, only letting swimmers compete in them if they transitioned before age 12. The decision coming just a few months after Leah Thomas made history as the first trans woman to win an NCAA swimming championship.
It is a policy that we need to introduce in order to protect the competitive fairness of our event.
LGBTQ advocacy groups slamming swimming's latest move as discriminatory, as some of the sports world's biggest superstars, like Billie Jean King and Megan Rapinoe, work to fight anti-trans laws, like the one about to go into effect in Indiana, where the Clausens live. We told Rapinoe what Kieran told us.
She just wants to play with her friends. What's your message to her?
Oh, gosh, we're with you. And it's like emotional to think about. I mean, this kid's, so young. She just literally wants to play with her friends.
For Rapinoe, it's personal.
God forbid a trans person excel in sports. I would rather have that than have kids committing suicide. I would literally give up everything that I've ever achieved for not one of these kids to feel what they're feeling.
Kieran seems undeterred with a message now about her journey.
Never stop being you. That's it.
Never stop being you.
There's so many kids that don't even have the opportunity to express who they really are. We are acknowledging more people as who they are than taking something away from somebody else.
And thank you for making time for us. Remember, we're still watching that gun violence prevention bill, the bipartisan measure. It is on the Senate's agenda right now. Could move tonight, possibly early tomorrow, so stay with us on NBC News Now and on the NBC News app. We'll let you know as soon as we know. In the meantime, let me know what you think about the stories we feature tonight. We are at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.